Well, hello everyone. I'm really happy to be joined today with three extraordinary leaders in higher education. I'm Sarah Steinberg. I'm on the advisory board for My Footpath. And as part of my contribution to My Footpath, I've been helping to facilitate various conversations with different leaders in higher education. And it's been absolutely fascinating. And I am very much looking forward to our conversation today. I'm going to ask our three guests to introduce themselves, but I will say in general, just going around the screen, that we have Dr. Amy Rose, Dr. Thank you, Amy. Dr. You threw me off. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Dr. Jovita Ross Gordon and Dr. Carol Caseworm. And they are the co-authors of a new book out on the presses that very much intrigued me, which makes this conversation all the more important. And that is a book called Creating a Place for Adult Learners in Higher Education. And I've spent the vast majority of my career with adult learners, and there are some books out there on the topic, but there's nothing current. This is a current, very important book citing a ton of research on the topic and reflecting on the amazing expertise that these women have. So without further ado, let's do some introductions. And Amy, if you wouldn't mind starting, and we'll just go in the same order that I mentioned everybody's name.
Hi, my name is Amy Rose. I'm an emerita professor of adult continuing education from Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois.
Thank you. Jovita?
Hi, I'm Javita Ross Gordon, and I'm a distinguished professor emerita from Texas State University, where I taught and coordinated programs in adult, professional, and community education.
Great. And Carol?
Carol Caseworm, and I am the Dallas Herring Emerita Professor of Adult and Community College Education from North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina.
So needless to say, you can tell from the titles alone that this is a distinguished group and should be a very interesting conversation about adult learners. So I mentioned the book very briefly, and Amy, I believe you're the lead author with your co-authors on the book. And I was wondering if you could spend a few minutes just talking about what inspired you all to write this book, and what were you trying to convey to the higher ed population about adult students, and anything else that you want to add about the process. Maybe you want to share a little bit about what it takes to co-write such a book with with others. So it's up to you.
I'll get it started and then the others can jump in
Great.
after I finish. So I just wanted to start off by saying that this book has been a long time in the making. We started talking about this book probably in the mid to early 2000s. And we started talking about it because we felt that there were two groups that were dealing with adults in higher education. One was the adult education community, and certain aspects of it, and the other were higher ed professionals. And the two groups did not talk to each other. And we were hoping to do something that would appeal to both groups, but particularly to the higher ed folks who might not really be aware of the research in adult and higher education. So we all brought varying pieces of expertise to this area, and we can talk about that in a minute. We got derailed. We did two other books. One was an edited book, a co-edited book, and one was another co-authored book on the foundations of adult continuing education. And then we circled back to our original idea that brought us together. And this time we were not defeated, and we were sidetracked by other things. And so we ended up with this book that we're here to talk about today. We feel that it's a very timely piece because there's a growing interest again in adult learners in higher education. This is somewhat cyclical, and it somewhat relates to the numbers of traditionally aged students. So we're seeing a dip in traditionally aged students, and so there's more of an interest in adult students again. And certainly COVID and distance learning have added to the interest and to the expansion of concern about adults in higher education. So we were hoping that to paint a broad picture of what the research says about adults in higher education and to begin a discussion about this discourse. We also are hoping to think about help people think about different pathways for adult learners. Very often adult learners have thought, well, they know what they want. They don't want to engage with the campus. And while some of that is of course true, it isn't entirely true. There are a lot of other things going on. And so we really wanted to highlight the research into adult students, adult motivation, and adult persistence related to the kinds of services that universities and colleges can offer. And then before the others jump in, I'll just say one more thing. Of course, community colleges, we talk about community colleges, and they are in the mix here. But of course, community colleges are also their own entity with their own focus very much on adult learners. And we recognize that even as we're trying to extend it to talk about higher education more broadly.
Thank you. And I will turn to the others for some additional comments about the book, but I wanted to just jump in on a point that I've been particularly interested in, and that is the students who have started but not completed. And so when I did my dissertation back in the dinosaur age, there were 20 million students in the country who the Department of Education believed had some credits but no degree. Today, the numbers have come out this year that it's much closer to 40 million. And so 40 million students in their adult years, I would venture a guess to say early 30s as an average age, but you may have some additional information on that. And so a group of students that colleges and universities, because exactly for the exact reason that you said, that the demographics of the traditional 18 to 22-year-olds is changing dramatically in the opposite direction, that colleges and universities are anxious to figure out how to re-engage these students. And that actually is the primary service that my footpath offers to different colleges and universities around the country, is to assist them in that kind of re-engagement. And to me, that that's just such an important group of students who need the services, the programs, the policies that we'll be talking about in this conversation that aren't necessarily exact replicas of what the 18 to 22-year-olds require. So I'll be really interested in continuing that. So thank you for setting up the conversation. And I turn to Jovita and Carol. Do you guys want to jump in on the process of putting the book together and what you guys were aiming to accomplish? Jovita, maybe you want to go next?
Well, I think Amy captured the important highlights. As she mentioned, we had been much earlier on interested in this endeavor, and we, ended up working on some other projects and came to establish our patterns as a team. So that was helpful. That when we came to this, we already, had come to some ways of working together. And we each brought different areas of expertise in different, but both in terms of our, academic foci on adult learners in higher education, and in terms of our experiences with those learners, and primarily, in undergraduate education for adults, which was the focus of the book, but also in our own experiences, graduate educators of students who were primarily non-traditional learners, whereas some graduate programs serve a lot of students who are coming directly out of their undergraduate program. Those students who populate adult education graduate programs are often a bit farther along in their years and in their careers. So, we found ourselves working with those students as well as our prior experiences that we'd had with adult learners. So I think we were drawing on all those things when we came to sort of figure out exactly how we wanted to approach this book. Amy also mentioned the cyclic nature of this, to sort of highlight how. In the book, we deal with some of the history. We were encouraged not to dwell too long in the history of the nexus between adult and higher education, but certainly to know that has been a reoccurring. It's been a constant relationship, but the interest in adult learners in higher education has been reoccurring, sort of to highlight how much that's true. My interest in adult learners in higher education started back when I was doing my own dissertation in the mid-1980s, and I chose a focus on reentry women and their reasons for returning to higher education. So, of course, as we come to the 2000s and find that people are saying, "Oh, there's these learners who are not populating our programs," we came with the sense of, well, they've been there all along, and they've been there in different ways. But we wanted to kind of make a point in the book in looking at how they're currently interacting with institutions and the kinds of things that are both, innovative that are being done now, but, to also include throughout the book some of the sort of established patterns of ways some programs have found to be effective in working with adult learners.
I would love for you guys to do a book with all the material that you left on the cutting room floor about the history, because when I was doing my dissertation, one of the things that I got very involved in, because I was looking specifically at Johns Hopkins University and their engagement with adult students, they were founded in 1876, and right from the beginning, they invited adults into the classrooms on campus, and there were no formal degrees. These were all non-degree programs, but nevertheless, women and men were included, as well as minorities. I mean, they had no restrictions on who could come into the classroom, starting in 1876. So I kind of got stuck in 1876 for a while. And for me, that ended up on the cutting room floor. So I would love for you guys to pull everything together and have another book come out on what you left on the cutting room floor. Because I think it is fascinating. The early days of adults in education and the reasons, their motivations for wanting to learn what was going on are quite fascinating. Carol.
Yeah, let me jump in. I'll take a slightly different task, although I also did my dissertation looking at adult undergraduates. But I, in my research and writing, have spent, as both Jovita and Amy have, looking at adult learners. But I was particularly taken as I visited both practitioner and scholarly discussions about students in undergraduate higher education, how everybody kind of lives in a bubble around the young student and thinks of the world of higher education as serving this very important, but in some ways rather unique individual set of individuals, and not really understanding the complexities and the problems that face adults who try and come into a more focused environment for young adults often, or if they have tried to break out and to do specialized programs, not really thinking about what it is that the adult faces in trying to engage in learning while they are also involved in being a parent, a worker, and often working in a community. And so there's a lot of special tugs and pulls. And I also found in my own research that a number of adults find that they are a stranger moving into a strange land that have special acronyms, special policies and procedures, special understandings that are not part of their prior world. So that even if they're reentry students, universities have changed a lot from the times that, when I went and registered, we stood in line and we signed. They didn't use computers at all. The idea of learning online was just unbelievable to most people. So I think it's really important for people that you're trying to engage in realizing that they're dealing with a wide variety of people. It's not a monolith. And they also are faced with a lot of diverse demands and expectations, both within the university or college, but also in their own lives that they're having to juggle with. So hopefully your folks, can come to recognize the complexity and the importance of what they're doing.
Well, that's a great segue to where I wanted to take the first part of this conversation, which was to talk a little bit more specifically about what are the supports that colleges and universities should be providing to adult students to encourage them either to go from zero to completion, or returning students who are somewhat on their way, but haven't crossed the finish line yet. So the whole issue of retaining adult students and helping them get to degree completion is something that I'd like to hear a little bit more about, some specific examples of either policies that you've found that schools should adopt, or support services. What are those, the whole range of things that you've already been talking about in your general introductions. But could you give some specifics that would help people who are listening to this discussion be able to, put some things into their basket of goodies to actually get the resources for to do?
We
Long
can talk.
question, but
Yeah, we did prepare to talk about some specifics, but if I could, I would just like to give a little bit more context to it before we get there. So one of the things I think it's important to understand, and we all have a alluded to it. I just kind of want to summarize what we just said, is that in the book, we really tried to focus on several points. And in the end, they all connect to this issue of persistence, retention, and completion. But looking specifically at adult learners, how they learn, their motivations, their life contexts, and their preferred ways of learning is one piece. Then we're trying to also look at the responses of institutions, the different ways they can respond, because as Carol said, adult students are not a monolith, and very often reactions are individual. So how does a higher education institution do that? What works? What doesn't work? What works for some people and not for other people? So really the recognition of the diversity of this group is very important. And also we were very focused on on trying to be more inclusive. Different groups that have been excluded from higher education. Adults are one as a group, but then there are a lot of subgroups within the adult population. And even within the definition of adult, we ended up deciding that we were going to look mostly at students over 25 and older. But in fact, the term non-traditional has been expanded to include a wide variety, students with a wide variety of life roles beyond the traditionally aged 18 to 22-year-old, even if they are 18 to 22. So we're looking at inclusivity, and we're trying to look at innovation. Now, innovation it's difficult to grasp on, because what's innovative in one moment will then be old by the time the book comes out. But we really tried to identify where possible innovative approaches. So some of that is what we're planning to talk about. And finally, we were very concerned about equity for adult students in particular, and for the subgroups within, because as Carol said, they're often in this world that they don't know about and that is not designed for them. So we were really hoping to bring all of those points together as we move forward. So in your question, I think, Carol, were you going to start with the specifics? Do you want to?
You go ahead, Amy. Whatever you want to say. We're equal partners here.
No, I've had my say about this, so.
I could jump in to talk a little bit about one of the chapters that I worked on there was a companion chapter that Amy worked on. And in fact, throughout the book, we kept sort of having a dance as to what it was too much material for one chapter, but it was also challenging to separate these two components. So we were looking at supports for students, and the chapter that we identified that I would focus on was basically on academic related supports. And as we went along, sometimes we would sort of have to decide, now, where are we going to deal with this particular topic, like a topic like career advising. But so a good part of this chapter focused on advising of adult students and on supports that were sort of related to academic advising. And to underscore this idea of there's no one approach that's going to work for all adult students, even though we want to cultivate a sensitivity to adult students and their varying needs. When I started to, engage more with the research on advising literature, I found there wasn't a lot on advising of adult learners in higher ed. There was a whole body of work on advising, and I became acquainted with it. And so, for instance, there were these dominant models of prescriptive advising and developmental advising that many in higher ed talked about and wrote about. And those who began to talk about what would be the appropriate approach to take with adult learners tended to emphasize the more developmental advising, because it was less. You can compare prescriptive advising to didactic teaching, and some have, where the teacher plays or the advisor plays a more dominant role. And the developmental advising has been compared to more student-centered or learner-centered teaching. The adult student having more kind of a voice in the decision making along the way of what choices they would make in terms of curriculum and scheduling and career growth and so on. But when people actually started doing some more recent research on those adult students and their preferences for advising, they found it wasn't quite that clear cut. So for instance, adult students in some cases did prefer more didactic and prescriptive models, and in other cases, more developmental approaches or some other approaches that have come to the fore in more recent decades. And part of that was situational. So much as we came to learn that in the teaching and learning side, that andragogy was something that was situational in terms of what were adult learners' preferences for teaching. So, for instance, adult learners might want more prescriptive advising for to meet their needs for accurate information and efficient information, because they have so many other things going on in their lives, and they want someone to lay out clearly for them how to advance through a given program. But they might lean toward a greater interest in developmental advising for things that were more long-term growth oriented, like career advising. And then others have written about approaches like intrusive advising, which it has the advisor taking a very strong role in trying to work with students from day one, and to be alert to their needs, and to be even more strongly guiding them than what's been called a prescriptive approach. So all that was there. Also, a fair amount of the literature has looked at some programs in terms of how students have been advised, and tried to identify what are some models of advising that have been found to be effective with them. Some approaches that seem to be working with certainly some students in community college and some students of color was a sort of a comprehensive approach to advising, where you began they were advising systems looked at both recruiting students and working with them immediately upon entry, but maybe having the constancy or continuity of the same person working with them throughout that span, or having a team of people working with them over the course of their studies. Then there certainly have been other modes of providing academic support to adult students that have been shown to be beneficial, and those other kinds of approaches have included academic coaching and bridge type programs that were specifically designed to help adult students moving from the GED as their way of meeting secondary requirements, and then moving into higher ed. So a number of programs developed just to work with those students and to help them make those necessary transitions into higher ed and moving through. And some other forms of advising that were sort of designed more with younger students with adaptation have also been found to be effective for adult learners, such as for those students who need developmental courses. It seemed to make sense for adult students if those courses weren't taken in isolation, and often waiting to take the real academic courses that would give them the credit that gave them a sense of going forward, but to look at approaches that were sort of blending core courses with the focused skills development that would normally have been approached in isolation in a developmental course. So all of these, what really came out of that search of that literature and looking at programs that were effective was that a number of different approaches have been proven to be effective with adult learners. And part of it is looking at the population, the setting, the context of students that you're working with, and what their, what needs they have and what preferences they have for advising.
Yeah. No, thank you. You touched on obviously a lot of different areas. One of the ones that resonated with me was actually tying to a conversation that I had recently with someone at a university, where they were approaching the advising for adult students through the use of life coaches, and employing a number of things that you were talking about. I don't know if they had delved as deeply into the research that you just relayed to us, but they were kind of coming to the same conclusion that at least for their adult population. They were very responsive to this life coach situation that they had worked out, where the life coaches were not academics, they were administrators in the roles. And so I think one of the important points that you have all stated is that adult learners aren't, they just aren't a homogeneous group that one size fits all, for sure.
Right.
I'd like,
And if
oh, do you want to go?
you want to go ahead?
I was just gonna, since if what I have followed exactly from what Jovita just did, if that's okay, for the non-academic supports. So the non-academic supports are something that in the literature has been very much ignored. In student affairs, they talk about the co-curriculum, meaning that students, especially residential students, learn from their life on campus almost as much as they do in the classroom, and that those two parts interact and create the liberal arts or just higher education that students encounter. But for adults, there has been really no interest in this co-curriculum. The thought is they come to class, they come to campus, they take their classes, they're motivated, they know what they want, and they're not going to engage. And some of the limited research on student engagement has found that while adults are very engaged in the campus, they're engaged mostly through their classwork. They're not as engaged in this co-curriculum. However, there is the beginnings of some research into the co-curriculum and what adults really want. And part of this comes from this idea that we've raised already, which is how do we help adult students feel that they belong on the campus? And one of the ways that we do this is by helping them create social networks. Now, those networks may not look the way they do for traditional students, but they still need something to pull them to help them maintain connection beyond their classes, unless they're truly very motivated. Again, this varies. So, but the research into this, it's spotty. So one thing, for example, is career development and career exploration. There has been little research on this for adults because it's assumed that adults know what they want. They come, they know what they want for a major, and they just go and they pursue it. However, some of the research has shown that this is not the case, that very often adults need to change course. Their goals are not realistic, whatever that may mean within whatever context it is. Or they may not fully understand the world of academia and how they reach their goals. And there may be multiple ways to reach their goals, so that they do need help with career exploration. And it's been found that models that focus on life experiences of the students, what they bring already, recognition of their past work lives, and how they reformulate that into new goals can be very effective for this group. I'm going to go through my list very quickly because I want to let Carol have her chance. Then childcare. Again, childcare is something that's always mentioned, but very disturbingly, a lot of places are doing away with their childcare centers. And in addition, childcare is a difficult subject because adult part-time students often come at night. And as much as they may need childcare, they don't want to disrupt the lives of their children at night. So some places, some community colleges, for example, have had nighttime childcare, but felt that it wasn't utilized. And so that's been also eliminated. So again, there's not some of what we would call common sense things are not, it's not as simple as one would think. There's a problem, but we don't quite know how to address it. One other area which is very, very important for traditionally aged students at a four-year college or university, is residence life. Now, again, residence life has been something that's been almost ignored for adult students, except for married student housing. But very, very often, married student housing at this point is for graduate students. Now, post World War II, to get back to the history, with the GI Bill and families coming to campus, yes, they were all undergraduates. But at this point, married student housing is not as in demand for undergraduates, but it may still serve a function. And students are still looking for some help. Of particular interest right now is the recognition of the unhoused for all groups, adults and traditionally aged. And so how do campuses deal with the unhoused, particularly if they have families? Now, there have been some interesting, although older, experiments with this. Smith College, for example, experimented with having a scholarship for women who then moved into the dorms with their children. And that was very successful, but not many places have continued that. So the research is unclear about how residence life would affect engagement, because we don't really have enough information. But it is an important topic, more important than what we had originally thought, although clearly not as important as it is for full-time residential students. And finally, I'll just end with clubs. Because clubs and centers are something that they have been recognized. We've all looked at women returning to school and women's centers in varying ways. We've all studied them. And but one thing that's clear from the research is that while some people feel that these provide a beginning step toward belonging within the institution, for other people, it's a waste of time and they don't want to be affiliated with this. And in the group that's been studied the most for this is veterans. So veterans centers are very important as a result of the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. We've been having a lot of veterans come back on the GI Bill, and many schools have restarted their veteran centers and allowing for them to have a place to meet. And while students by and large like to have a place to meet, there are many who also feel that they want to be integrated. They don't want to be set apart. They want to integrate with the rest of the college students. And even if they're older, they don't care. They just don't want to be seen as different. So it's a balancing act again. We want to make everyone feel welcome. We want to make everyone feel that they belong, but there's a multiplicity of ways for doing that.
Yep. Thank you.
Carol.
Well, let me go back and let's start at the beginning when a student attempts to think about going to college or back to college at a later age. And the complexity of it is often faced by whatever mechanism, whether it's media or a person that they contact, trying to figure out how do they enter. I've spent a lot of time on websites, and I can tell you it's very confusing unless there is a designated person or area. And some institutions have gone to almost a concierge approach, where they designate an area that is for the adult coming back or the reentry student. And then they have a set of individuals or an individual who understands the difficulties that the adult faces in entering into a university or re-entering into a university. Some of it has to do with admissions and how they are going to be advised, given they have had past credits, and some are good and some are not good. how are they going to deal with financial issues, realizing that about 60% of adults are what we would call having difficulties financially and often face significant costs going back to school from just paying tuition and fees, but often it's books, it's computers, it's accessing special software, all kinds of things. And beyond it, just as expressed by both Jovita and Amy, it's trying to find a sense of focused purpose and knowing that they have support if they need study skill help, if they need financial aid guidance, if they need a special opportunity for perhaps doing prior learning assessment. We're seeing many institutions move into that area. And we're also finding individuals who come back later in life, having been away from the university for a while, and finding that the degree program that they began has changed dramatically. And they're going to need to develop different knowledge and different skills, or they need to rethink what it is happening in the world of work, that they need to maybe reorient their academic major. And a lot of it is having a person or individuals or a sensitivity that the institution really does care about their continuance. And for smaller institutions, it's actually helping them develop some way of connecting with an advisor or a key instructor who understands their life as well as understands their mission to get that degree.
For sure. And thank you for setting up my specific example that I wanted to put forward as we're beginning to sort of wrap up all of this information that you guys have provided. I relate a story to you, and I'll just let everybody know that I was at a restaurant recently, and there was and I was wearing my swag, which I always do. And in this case, it was my swag for the University of Arizona. And he tapped me on, one of the managers walked by and he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, bear down. And I'm like, bear down. I was trying to remember I didn't remember which hat I was wearing. And so I didn't know what he was talking about. But it finally clicked that he was making this connection to the University of Arizona. And he told me that he had done 3 years full time as an engineer on the main campus, but life got in the way and he had to step away. Now it was 10 years later, and he was beginning to think about going back to school, but he was nervous in all the ways that you just talked about, Carol, and that Amy and Jovita have also touched on. He didn't know if he could be successful, even after having finished 3 full years in an engineering program, but so much time had gotten away from him. And I was just curious. I know this is a very specific instance and a very specific question, and you guys have done, very broad research on this topic. So, so I understand I'm bringing you to, sort of the tip of the pencil. But what advice would you have given this manager in a restaurant who really loved the engineering, wanted to go back, but was scared, didn't know who to talk to, didn't know where the entry point was, all the things that you just said, Carol? He was living real life, real time, and expressing that to me. I'm just wondering if you guys had been in a similar situation, what would you have advised this student? And the second question I'm going to ask you is, what would you advise we'll just pick on the University of Arizona, but any university, what would you advise them to do to make it as easy as possible for a student to come back, for an adult student to come back? Anyone want to take that on?
Having done research with adult reentry, what I can tell you is they are looking for initially a person who will listen to them and begin to parse out what the issues are. And that listening then suggests that they're going to be supportive, but it's identifying that person. You're very right. And so I think institutions that have been clearly focused on adults, oftentimes it's a distance learning institution, it's an accelerated degree program institution, or they, for whatever reasons, are doing major work in the adults. That is very easy. But if they go to a university, I've worked at universities, we've all worked at universities. Unless the university has designated a concierge person or a contact person or an adult learning center, it becomes really, really difficult. And so what I've heard from a number of people that I've interviewed is oftentimes it's not the university initially that helps them, it's their coworker who's already been to the university recently, or it's the family member that's helped them, or maybe if they are in the Kiwanis or Rotary, they will help them. In other words, they will be looking for a way to begin to grapple with the issues of, can I do it? Some of it is external support from family, hopefully, or coworkers. And then some of it comes from an institution and hopefully individuals that they made initial contacts that are sensitive to that issue. And I know, Jovita, you've worked also in that kind of situation too. What would you suggest?
Well, I was going to step back. Obviously, and Carol, you gave some good concrete suggestions as well, but I was going to step back and sort of say, from the standpoint of being maybe that first person of contact, that one of the messages I would want to convey strongly to such an inquiring student is that having stopped out previously is not necessarily a determinant that you won't at some point complete higher education and that you can't complete higher education. In fact, there's been, some recent work pointing to the fact that those students who've had their studies interrupted and returned, despite the fact that it's taken them some years and maybe several institutions, that they should be thought of not as dropouts, but as persisters, because they negotiate different entries and stopouts, if you will, and renegotiate how to continue. One recent study by Gale indicated that, and they were looking at this group is sometimes called comebackers. People, we always find new terminology for a group that we've called comebacks. So yesterday's reentry student is sometimes today called a comebacker. And one study by Gale looked at some institutions who had re-enrolled in 2013, and they then recontacted those students in 2021. And what they found out was that 80% of them by that point had completed the credentials that they had as a goal to accomplish. Now, some of the students who hadn't completed a degree didn't have that as an original goal. So that's another subset of adults that we need to be familiar with, is that some students don't return to higher ed to earn a full degree. They come, for a specific purpose. There may be a credential, a certificate of some type that would advance their careers. So they too are a segment. But basically what they said is, what the study pointed to was that looking at students over a longer period of time and with different forms of support, many of those students who did find it necessary to stop out earlier certainly do have the possibility and the likelihood that they will complete. And we all know the research also that says that adult students, when they're able to stay engaged during those periods when they're able to stay engaged, often have very strong academic performance. They do well. And that's not to say that some of them don't need, strong academic advising supports or developmental classes to get restarted, but that when they're in their continuous periods of study, that they tend to perform quite well academically. So it's important for a person like that to hear that are while we could say that students have persistence problems, we also can say that adult students are typically good students because they're very motivated in ways
Yes.
some younger learners aren't. So I think these are things to have them be encouraged to know about. And for institutions, this idea of reaching out to these comeback students, another term that's been developed is the term ready adult. And that term's been used to apply to those students who have accumulated at least a year or more of credit already, so that they have some momentum behind them, and that reaching out to those students who have attended your own institution in the past and who have found it necessary to stop. But looking, at your own academic records for those students who have stopped out, who did have a significant body of credits, and reaching out to them to see if they are open to being reengaged at this point in time are a couple of things that I wanted to kind of mention that do come with some both research support and some evidence of current programs that are making real attempts to reach this population. And some initiatives that have been very helpful for this type of student too are I was going to say tuition programs that are aimed at helping adult students. Some states have developed programs. College Promise programs was the term I was searching for. Some of those have been developed at an institutional level. Some of them have been developed at a statewide level to tailor College Promise programs that are offered to younger students, but to tailor them in a way that they will be responsive to the needs of these students who are wanting to reengage but have financial challenges.
Yep. Which is a whole nother topic, really.
Can I just jump in here?
Yes, please.
I just want to say, in terms of this specific example, I do have some concerns. So I think first of all, the fears of going back to school, as both Carol and Jovita said, across the board, that's true of everybody. Students who return to school do very well. However, he was in engineering, and we really would need to sit down with him to see if he still wants to do engineering, and is the University of Arizona the right place? Because chances are, even though it's their own credits, they're going to make him take a lot more courses because it's so out of date. Now, he could go to one of the more innovative programs, such as Empire State College, and get those all count, but that would not be the same as getting an engineering degree from the University of Arizona. So it really depends on what he wants to do. I mean, not to belabor this, but there are some real issues. Now, in terms of the institution, yes, of course, the institution could try to be more accommodating to students who stop out for 10 years, particularly in a field like engineering or in a science. But there's going to be much less leeway in those fields than there will be in some other fields, where it's much easier to come back and be successful. And so I think in this particular example, it's more complex than we might like.
No question about that. And in fact, I didn't say it, but he was, he was a manager in the restaurant. His interests had really transitioned towards business and retail. And I would imagine if it actually comes to pass that he decides to go back, that it wouldn't be for engineering.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, well, I started my career as an engineer, so I don't know if it's good or bad, but
Well, no, just in terms of being out for so long, it would be
yeah,
a much harder to go back.
quite true, quite true.
Right.
Well, I am I am the sad person who has to bring this conversation to a close. And I wanted to, I don't know if this is going to show up clearly, but this is the book that we've been talking about, Creating a Place for Adult Learners in Higher Education. And it's hot off the presses, and we've heard just the tip of the iceberg of the content that is in the book. I've read the book, and I know that you've only touched on the highlights. And I encourage those of you who are watching this to take a look at the work that is included in this book. Although this isn't a book pitch, but I think the idea that the information is so readily accessible through this new book is something everyone should appreciate. So thank you all very much. This was a very interesting conversation, and I very much enjoyed speaking with you and joining with you. So
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you.
you're quite welcome. And I think we'll bring it to a close. So have a great day.